There are many games out there that are unknown and receive very little attention. A few are hidden gems, others serve as cautionary tales, and some are just plain interesting. In this video, I will be showing you 5 of these obscure games, all of which have 0 concurrent players according to Steam charts. For each one, we'll first take a look at their Steam page, then I'll play the game, and finally, I'll give you my review. Camera Obscura. So I originally played this game more than 7 years ago, after Steam recommended a cheap platformer bundle to me. I got pretty far into it, but I never ended up finishing it. I think I gradually lost interest in it because some of the levels were very frustrating. That's what I remember at least. The central mechanic is pretty unique. Basically, as you can see here, you can create an afterimage type of effect, which allows you to copy and move pieces of the environment. Watching this trailer right now is also reminding me the soundtrack is really good in this game. Anyway, I haven't played this game in a very long time, so I'm very excited to go back to it and finally beat it. After playing through the whole thing, which took about 7 hours, I can definitely say that this is an excellent game. Like any game, it has its flaws, and of course, I will tell you both what I liked and didn't like. The story, visuals, and music create a nice lonely atmosphere that I really enjoyed, but I want to begin by discussing the gameplay. As expected in a 2D platformer, you have the basic actions of running and jumping, but you can also move the camera's viewpoint around to a certain extent to get a better look at your surroundings, which is a nice touch. Besides that, the only other action you can take is creating an afterimage of surrounding platforms, as we saw in the trailer. This is the game's main mechanic, so I'll describe exactly how it works. When clicking the relevant button, the player character's camera will flash and a shadow-like copy of nearby blocks will be made. That flashing effect can get pretty annoying, but it can be turned off in the settings. The copied blocks will move in tandem with the player character for a short time before becoming fixed in place. Now, the movement of the copied tiles is not 100% identical to the movement of the player character. The tiles will lag behind and move slightly less. After their position becomes fixed, these tiles begin to fade away and completely disappear after about 5 seconds. All of this feels perfectly tuned for the way many levels are designed, so they did a great job with this. Anyway, flashing again will make any existing copies disappear, and there's also a dedicated button for destroying the copies, which is another nice inclusion. This afterimage system on its own is very good, and it's a lot of fun solving puzzles with this ability. And as the game goes on, more relevant gameplay elements are introduced, making the system a bit deeper. For example, some tiles are reflective and cannot be copied. There are glowing tiles that will destroy any part of an afterimage that touches them, and some platforms will move, which makes platforming more complex, and also adds an additional element of timing for the player if they want to copy those platforms. Those are all aspects of the environment, but enemies can also interact with afterimages. For example, you can only get rid of them using the afterimage. You can either drop them into a pit or crush them, but you can also fall into pits and be crushed, so you have to be careful. Also, enemies are involved in some puzzles where you need to lead them to buttons that you couldn't reach yourself. The level design is pretty good in this game. In a lot of places, it felt like I was coming up with a way to traverse the environment, rather than solve a puzzle that someone designed. I don't know how they pulled that off, but they did a really good job with a little bit of immersion in the sense that the places you're traveling through don't feel designed for you to do so. Also, in many areas, you can use one flash to solve multiple problems, such as being able to cross multiple gaps. It was pretty cool to try to figure out how to beat each level in as little flashes as possible, which is somewhat incentivized by the game. Not in your first playthrough of the levels, but if you ever go back to the level select screen and look at the levels you already completed, you can see optional objectives you have to complete the level in very few flashes, and to complete the level in very little time. This is a very nice way to make the levels a little bit replayable. There are many parts of this game which are very difficult, some to a frustrating degree. I even found out that obtaining one of the collectibles in the game wasn't possible for 2 years after the game's release, until it was patched in 2017. So those things make me think the developers didn't playtest their levels enough. One last note about the level design. There are not many instances of oversights that I've found, but there is one that stands out to me. In the level Parliament Boxes, what you're supposed to do is get this slime creature to cross a segmented path in order to press multiple buttons for you. I actually remember this level from when I played this game many years ago, and I might have quit the game here. This level is pretty frustrating to me. I have gotten close to beating it legitimately, but eventually I gave up on that and broke the puzzle by managing to get onto the segmented path, which allowed me to press the buttons myself. This is not good, but I did enjoy beating the level this way because it felt like I was defying the level designer who had been making me rage at certain points throughout the game. That was definitely not what they were going for, but I did end up enjoying this level for that reason. So those are my thoughts on the gameplay. Now I'll say a little bit about the story. In order to find out anything about the characters or setting, you have to collect these notes which are scattered throughout the levels. These are called mementos, and they're the game's only collectible. Now these do visually fit the camera theme of the game since they look like photographs, but they are just notes. They're not diegetic in any way. It's not like the main character took a picture in this location in the past, or is finding photographs left for her, or anything like that. So I did not like that non-diegetic aspect, but that is a minor critique. And other than that, I really liked this way of telling the story, where the player gradually collects small pieces of information over time. The gaps in the available information makes the player think for themselves and gives them something to wonder about as they play. I won't go into story spoilers, but I did enjoy the story here, particularly the setting, which is a huge tower that was being built by the Sun sect for generations until the day they all mysteriously disappeared. Now after years of being abandoned, the structure is derelict and inhabited by strange creatures. I personally find the visuals in this game appealing. I really like the design of the main character, which I think is pretty cute. If you stay still for long enough, she'll do an idle animation. And when you reach the later levels, you can visibly see her breath because the air is getting colder the further she climbs up. Those are really nice additions that I really appreciated. The backgrounds are in a drawn style, and I think they fit well together with the pixel art in the foreground rather than clash with it, but I guess it is weird that they are in different styles. So overall, I highly recommend this game, especially if you like 2D platformers. The only thing I would be wary of is that the game can be frustrating at times, as I've alluded to. The game has a nice amount of levels, and as I mentioned, it was very fun for me to go through many of them again to try to get the gold medal in the optional objectives for each level. I haven't 100%ed the game yet, but I intend to go back and get all the gold medals. So yeah, I think you will get a nice amount of playtime with this game for the very reasonable price of $1.99. Wars and Warriors, Joan of Arc. Alright, so this game was actually planned to be in the previous video in this series, 6 Steam games that nobody plays. So I bought this game while making that video, and played it a little bit, only for about 3 hours. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it, and the other games in that video were just more interesting to me at the time. So I ended up not playing the game anymore and not doing anything with the footage. Now I'm ready to give it another shot. There are a couple things that do make me interested in this game. First of all, I like this retro low poly look. This is an older game, it came out in 2004. The second thing is, I think it has like a unique approach to this type of strategy game, because it seems like in the trailer here we could see that there's 2 different types of gameplay. One where you have a standard, action game third-person perspective and you're fighting enemies, and another one where it's more like an RTS where you can command units from a bird's eye view. When I first played the game, I never reached the point where you unlock those types of RTS levels, so I haven't seen that yet. I'm excited to see if that's any good. As I mentioned before, I tried this game previously, but didn't get too far into it. This time though, I got hooked very quickly and couldn't put the game down. I completed my 26-hour long playthrough in only 5 days. I'll explain the mechanics in roughly the order they are introduced, and give my feedback along the way. First of all, the game is broken up into 8 big levels. Each level has different objectives to complete, some being mandatory objectives and others being optional objectives that reward you with gold and experience. These are both pretty varied. Just a few examples include destroying certain types of buildings, safely escorting NPCs, or killing a specific enemy unit. When you first start the game, you control 2 commanders, Joan of Arc and Jean de Metz. You fight in a hack and slash type of gameplay, similar to something like Hyrule Warriors, where you tend to fight many enemies at once. There are many different attacks and combos you can do, and each of the commanders has a unique moveset. As you progress through the game, you unlock more commanders, and it was pretty cool to specialize them using the game's RPG elements. For example, I made Jean de Metz a very fast character with very strong range attacks by allocating many of his stat points into dexterity, while I made Laia very powerful by leveling his strength and centralizing his skill points into one particular attack. Partway through the first level, a couple of standard units will join your party as troops. For now, you can't command them directly. Instead, they follow you when you move and attack enemy units that come too close to them. There is an inventory system which is kind of interesting because it is grid-based, so you might have to organize your items in order to fit them efficiently. One thing I had trouble with was figuring out how to heal my units, even though I had a few healing items. but I eventually realized if you put healing items into this section, the troop inventory, your units will automatically use them when at low health. After this, in the next level, you get access to shops, which allow you to buy or sell weapons, armor, consumables, and accessories, which have varying effects, like increasing the range of bows or augmenting stat values. A little bit after this, you unlock the ability to recruit more troops from barracks that are located in forts or villages. Now, each of these has a limited number of villagers that you can convert into any unit type you want. This is pretty cool, but the balancing is just off. Your troops lose HP very quickly. If you encounter an enemy commander or archers with exploding arrows, your army will be annihilated. There is no way around it. So even at this early stage of the game, I figured that the troop system probably was not worth engaging with because it's a money sink to recruit the units, but then the units themselves become a consumable sink because if you want them to stay alive at all, they need a lot of consumables, which they will exhaust quickly and then die. Because of this, I suspected that it would be more efficient to just play using solely the commanders, keeping the money to buy equipment and consumables for them. But I did want to give the troop system a chance and experience the game as the developers intended, so I did recruit a lot of troops and tried to keep them alive for as long as possible during my playthrough. Now for the last major mechanic of the game, RTS mode. You can enter this mode at any time after you unlock it. Doing so changes the camera angle to a bird's eye perspective and allows you to easily create groups of units that will move together.
Ready to comply. Units, reassign to my command!
By the way, each commander has a unique voice line for each order you can give them. This could become annoying since you might be hearing the same ones over and over again, but I liked it. Anyway, RTS mode also allows you to choose enemies for your units to attack,
For France!
and assign certain troops to operate siege weapons.
We are fully manned.
The siege weapons are one of the clunkiest aspects of the game, mostly due to subpar pathfinding. The cannons had a tendency to get stuck on many things. There was one really strange case where a cannon got stuck on a flat plane for some reason, and I couldn't get it unstuck no matter what I did. But in other cases, the cannons would run into each other, or into a tree, or something like that, and I spent a good amount of time trying to redirect them away from obstacles. The pathfinding of your troops is better, but has its own issues. For example, in this clip, all of these guys on screen are trying to head into this doorway, but many of them are stuck, and some are just standing still. Overall, I think there are a lot of cool ideas in this game, but certain things are definitely holding it back. I've already mentioned the balancing and pathfinding, but the controls are flawed as well. I really did not like the camera movement in this game. There's a certain speed threshold that needs to be reached for the camera to start moving. This is not a sensitivity issue. When doing some other tasks, like horse riding or aiming a ranged weapon, this threshold is removed, and the camera can be moved with slight tweaks of the mouse. This is fine when aiming, but when riding a horse, the camera is so sensitive that I thought the camera movement was random at first. So those are the most important points I wanted to make. Now for some more miscellaneous ones. Significantly far into the game, a new mechanic is introduced where certain enemy units are actually mercenaries and not part of the enemy faction inherently. So what you can do is, if you don't mind spending the money, you can recruit them onto your side by just clicking the R key next to them. That was a really nice way to tie what was happening in the narrative into what was happening in the gameplay. And it was unexpected because it appeared so late into the game. In the same level, there was also a side objective to sow the seeds of distrust between the enemy faction, which is the English, and the mercenaries, by having the mercenary units kill English units, and I really liked that. The story is pretty simple in this game. The voice acting was the best part of the narrative for me. It's not that bad, but I found it funny in a campy way.
Ah, yes. The beautiful Loire River basin is much more pleasant now that we've driven the English from the surroundings of Orléans.
Indeed, my dear Etienne, but this is not the moment to bask in our success. For if we are to deliver our Dauphin to Rheims for his coronation, we will need to expel the enemy from Tourelle. Mind you, this is no easy task.
Unfortunately, the audio balancing here is not great. The voices aren't at a consistent volume, so sometimes you hear the dialogue clearly, but other times the voices are drowned out by other sounds.
That should dampen the spirits of the English if they decide to return to Orléans, only to see their comrades slain in battle.
There are volume sliders, so you can make all the voice lines louder, but the problem is that the slider that controls the voice volume also controls the menu sound effects and combat sound effects, which are inherently louder. So no matter how you set this up, something will either be too loud or too quiet. Anyway, the game's soundtrack is really nice. The individual songs are really good, and they fit well with what you're doing in the game. I personally didn't mind the visuals at all, besides maybe the render distance, but there is a texture improvement mod that you can use if you want the game to look a little bit better. It seems to mess with the UI a little bit, but it seems pretty nice overall. In the end, despite all the criticism I have for it, I enjoyed my time with this game, so I do recommend it, but not too highly. On Steam, the price is $6.99. If you buy this on sale, don't have too high expectations, and have the patience to read through the text dump tutorials, then I think you'll enjoy your time with this game. Lil Big Invasion. So this game, I'm not 100% sure how I initially found it, but I think I found it through a forum because I was just looking up Pikmin inspired games or Pikmin likes, something to that effect, and I found someone posted about this game, and I went to check it out on Steam. It had a demo, and I played that for less than 10 minutes and I liked it, so I bought the full game. Another thing that this game's visual style reminds me of is the game A World of Goo, which I played on the Wii as a kid and I really liked it. That's just what it reminds me of, but anyway though, as I said, I've had this in my Steam library for a little bit, and it does have 0 players according to Steam charts, so this type of video is the perfect excuse for me to go and finally play it. So I played about 2 hours of this game, beating 2 out of the 5 total worlds. Each of the levels is basically one big puzzle, where your goal is to collect as many of these little firefly creatures as you can, and guide them to the exit. The player character emits a light, which enables you to interact with certain things, and causes the fireflies to follow you after bumping into them. The light depletes over time, and if it goes out, you cannot interact with anything, and the fireflies will stop following you. You can refill the light by resting at these nest things, which will also point you in the direction of any fireflies that are not in your party. Once you exit a level, your fireflies are tallied up and you can unlock more levels by reaching certain firefly thresholds. So those are the basics of the game. Of course there are some more gameplay elements that are gradually introduced, like wind that pushes fireflies, and hidden passageways. I'm sure that there are some more obstacles and gimmicks introduced in the later levels that I haven't seen as well. I think this game was originally intended to be played on mobile devices. This explains why the camera feels a little too zoomed in, which I didn't like. It would also explain why some timing puzzles feel way too difficult compared to the rest of the game. Moving your finger across a phone screen is a much smaller distance than moving your mouse across your computer screen, so these types of puzzles should have been rebalanced a little bit when the game was ported to Steam. Probably the biggest issue with this port is that you constantly have to keep left click pressed in order to move. This kinda sucks because you basically have to keep your finger in that position for the entirety of the time you are playing. This is pretty uncomfortable, and the controls could have easily been altered to avoid this, so this is pretty bad. One last negative thing I have to say about the game is that once I beat the levels in the first world and was moving on to the second, the game crashed my entire computer, so that wasn't good. But no harm came out of it, so it's not a big deal, but I thought I should mention it. I like the sound design in this game. I think it's pretty good. Also, it has a cute, distinct visual style. Overall, I liked this game, but I wasn't too captivated by it. I feel like this is the type of game that you would play in short bursts, so it's probably a good fit for mobile. I would not really go out of my way to recommend this one, but it's not a bad game by any means, and it's probably a little better on mobile as I've alluded to, so consider that if you're interested in playing this one. Pink Heaven. So I was looking through my Steam wishlist to see if any of the games in there have 0 players and would be interesting to include in this video, and I found this game, Pink Heaven, which I have no recollection of ever seeing or putting in the wishlist, but when I came to its page, I saw that it was developed by Pixel, who is the sole developer of one of my favorite games, Cave Story. It seems like in this one we play as the office lady, who is a side character in another one of Pixel's games, Curo Blaster. For some reason you can see the main character from that game on the bottom of the HUD in this game. I don't know why that is, but anyway, this game is free, and I haven't played too many of Pixel's games, so I'm really glad I found this, and I think it's going to be very good. I didn't realize this before playing, but this is actually a demo for Curo Blaster. I love this type of demo, where rather than giving you access to a small portion of the main game, the developer has constructed a unique scenario for you to play through. In this case, you play as a minor character from the main game in a self-contained side story. This game is of course very small. It took me about 10 minutes to play through it once. There is a choice to make about halfway through that will change the path you take through the rest of the levels and affect the ending, so there is some replayability. Once you beat the game, you unlock hard mode, which is very, very difficult. No matter what mode you're playing in, if you lose all your lives, your progress is erased, and you have to start over on the first level. I really like the challenge this provided, especially in hard mode. As I mentioned, the game isn't long, so that wasn't too annoying. In total, it took me about an hour to complete both routes of the normal mode and the singular route of the hard mode. The gameplay here is very good, but you might find the jumping a little floaty at first. It feels very similar to Pixel's other games, so you'll be used to it if you've played those. The art, especially the animations, is really great. I really like the feedback you get when you kill enemies. There's a lot of charm to the animations and sprites. One small critique I have for the visuals is that the game starts in the smallest possible size. I'm not sure why. I don't think anyone would play the game like this, but you can change this in the settings. Pink Heaven is free and fun. You can't get much better than that, so I highly recommend you play this. And if you've never heard of Pixel before, then definitely look into him. He's the creator of many excellent and influential indie games. Echo's Esker. Echo's Esker is a 3D action game with some noticeable inspiration from the Legend of Zelda series. Now, I've known about this game for a long time. I was originally going to include it as the first game in the first video of this series. From the trailer here, which I saw back then, this looked like the exact type of game I was looking for. A strange, unique game that probably only a handful of people have ever played, and it does look like it has the potential to be pretty fun. So I did try it out, but I only played it for about 25 minutes, because the game is abnormally dark, like you cannot see almost a single thing in the game. It's very strange. Anyway, I didn't have too many good things to say about the game, so yeah, I did not include it in the first video, but I'm willing to go back now and give it another chance. The game's not fully released, but it has a demo available, so that's what I'll be playing. When you start a new game, you can't see much. From the placement of these sconces, I could tell that the room was really big, or at least really tall. When I moved forward, a white triangle appeared, indicating that something is below this sconce. Approaching this, a button prompt appeared. Pressing the indicated button opened the door, which I didn't even know was there, and also caused a minimap to appear. The next room is similarly dark. There are a few items here and 2 chests. Interacting with one of the chests zooms in on the player character, so we can finally see what they look like. The character's design is interesting. It has a unique twisted look to it. For some reason, opening a chest leaves a small light on the floor, and that is what allows us to see our character. Other things give off light as well. Killing an enemy will leave a light in the location they died. Your flask will give off a minuscule amount of light when full. And hitting a wall will create a fleeting light, which I assume is meant to imitate sparks. Now, as you can probably tell, none of these help too much in seeing in the dark or navigating around, and I don't think they're meant to. What I'm getting at is that the game doesn't seem designed with darkness or the lack of visibility in mind as a mechanic. To put it another way, you cannot meaningfully interact with the lack of light. The closest you can get to this is staring at the minimap. Imagine if the flask, which is your source of healing, was also an important source of light. The player would have to manage their resources. Do they want to use up their light source in order to heal? Or would they rather deal with an increased risk of dying in order to keep their light lit? That's kind of an interesting idea on paper, but the game doesn't go for anything like that at all. And of course it doesn't have to. There's no reason to have light and dark based mechanics in the game if the developer doesn't want them. But without them, what is the point of the beginning of the game being so dark? This only serves to hinder the player, in my opinion. In the best case scenario, this teaches the player to rely on the minimap and stare at that for large periods of time. In the worst case scenario, the player starts a new game, puts up with this for maybe a few minutes, and closes the game. Now, one last note about this is that the first area in the game is the darkest, so even though other areas are dimly lit, they do have much better visibility. With all of that said, there's a lot more to discuss here than just the game's flawed lighting, but I felt like I should discuss it in detail because it's my biggest criticism of Echo's Esker. Now I'll tell you about the rest of the game, starting with the gameplay. When you first begin, you have no explicit objective. As you wander around, you will come across many collectible items, and when you pick one of these up for the first time, you'll be shown an item description. I really like this. The descriptions are interesting, and I feel like they tell you the perfect amount of information about the item itself and the world. I assume that many of these items will be used for crafting or trading later in the game, but the most useful ones to us now are the wooden lances. These are your main weapon, and you can use them to do basic swing attacks, but you can also throw them. After throwing them, they will get stuck in the floor or walls, so you can go pick them up again if you can't get close enough to reach them. Aiming this is a little difficult at first because there is no reticle or anything like that to indicate where you are aiming, but I somewhat got used to it as I played. This system is improved when you unlock the dog-like companion, Esko. Basically, he'll fetch the lances you have thrown and bring them back to you. This is pretty helpful because a lot of them land in places that are inaccessible to you. I thought this was really cool and unique. I've never seen something like this in a game before. The combat is pretty flawed, but can be serviceable at times. This moth boss fight was the best fight I've seen in the game. You can't hit the boss with regular attacks since it's flying, and this huge purple orb on its body really stands out in this design, so it's pretty obvious that you need to hit this spot with a ranged attack. Once you do, the boss will fall to the ground and you can hit it for a while. Not too bad of a concept. It's a nice way to get the player used to the throwing and fetch mechanics. The problems appear when things stop working as intended. For some reason, Esko does not always collect all of the wooden lances you throw. I don't think this is intentional, as if the wooden lances are breaking after being thrown a certain amount of times, or anything like that. As you can see here, sometimes they just go through surfaces, so I'm guessing they just go so far out of bounds that Esko can't reach them, or just disappear sometimes. Unfortunately, even if this doesn't hinder your efforts to keep fighting the boss, it doesn't seem like this fight is beatable. Once you deal a certain amount of damage, the purple orb on it will break, causing the creature to become immobilized. You cannot damage it in this state, and there's a white triangle that shows up here, which I'm guessing indicates that you need to do some kind of specific interaction here. I threw a lance at this spot, which caused a red orb to appear, but nothing else happened. I reloaded my save and retried this fight, getting up to the same part again. This time I hit one of the nearby creatures, picked it up, and threw it into the hole on the boss, which appeared as the same red orb we saw earlier. Again, nothing happened here, so I couldn't figure this out. I'm pretty sure something is not working as intended here. Regular enemies will also break sometimes. They just stop acting and stay in place until you kill them. I'm not sure if I was doing something to cause this or if it happened at random. The worst example of this was actually another boss, which did not attack me once, both times I fought it. One more issue with the combat is the lock-on. Getting too close to an enemy when locked on will cause the camera to move erratically very quickly. Speaking of camera issues, the movement of the camera is too free. There is nothing to prevent the camera from becoming tilted, making the areas look like they were built on an incline. Also, there are no upper or lower limits for the camera, so you can do strange things like this. Another major issue with the gameplay is that sometimes you will jerk around or teleport short distances. This reminds me a lot of what you might see from an online game experiencing synchronization issues. This is truly strange. I have no idea why this could happen. I have fallen out of bounds a couple of times, but I don't really know if this is what is causing it, because I just can't see what's happening. Many games have failsafes for something like this, like killing the player if they are falling for a certain amount of time, or setting their position to some default value if they go out of bounds. But there is no system like that here. In this game you just fall infinitely, so you need to manually quit out when this happens. Anyway, I exploited this teleportation glitch to get through this door, and you could probably use this in other areas of the game to sequence break and stuff like that. Now I want to give you an overview of the locations and plot details I saw so far. As I mentioned earlier, the game gives you very little plot or character information up front. The only thing you know when you start the game is the name of the starting area, which shows up on the loading screen. If you turn around right at the starting point, you'll find 2 flowers. When you pick one up, the item description hints that this location has something to do with the royal family. After exploring this area for a little while, you'll find a key, which you can use on this locked door. Once you pass through this section, you'll come to this outdoor area where you find Esko. Once again, I really like how the character models have a creepy, twisted look, and this is really nicely done on Esko in my opinion. This area has some interesting features, like large tree branches and spiral waterfalls. I don't really know what's going on here, but it looks kinda cool. This is where the door I clipped through was. Once you pass that, you head into this set of jade hallways. This is a pretty empty area. At the end of it is a save point and another door. As soon as you pass through this door, you are thrust into a conversation with Lieutenant Reynolds. He tells us that our sister is very upset and wants to speak to us, and directs us on where to go. Outside our sister's room, a guard greets us, and from this line we learn that our father has recently died. Once we find our sister's room, we enter, and she speaks to us, with her lines read out by a text-to-speech program. I actually don't mind this, because the delivery of the words kind of pairs nicely with the creepy look of the models that I've mentioned before.
We have an agreement with the Wraiths. They care for our deceased, and we grant them privacy.
But the dialogue comes off as a little comedic because of this, and I don't think that's what the developer intended here. Anyway, basically she tells us that the Wraiths have broken an agreement and are behaving abnormally. Then we go to sleep, and while sleeping we see a mysterious shape. It calls out for Echo, and begs us to bring Echo below the castle. At this point you can explore a lot more of the area. There are a lot of NPCs to find, but a lot of them seem like placeholders. Many of the rooms are vast and empty, with pop-up messages telling us that these areas are under development. One room has a teleporter, which allows you to reach those 2 bosses I discussed earlier. And that's all of the game I've seen so far. Honestly, I don't think this game was ready to have a demo released. The way I see it, a demo should reflect the final product, and allow players to try out a game so that they could decide whether they would like to buy it or not. This game is just not there yet, and I think if people were to play this, then they would probably be turned away by the oversights, errors, and bugs in the game. One more impression I get from this project is that the developer drastically overscoped it. This seems like a very large project for a solo developer who hasn't released a finished game yet. And there's also an Echo's Esker comic series, so yeah, this is a multimedia project. Of course, this is all the opinion of someone outside looking in, but that is the impression I get. With all of that said, I do think that there is a good base here. If the mechanics like movement, combat, and fetching are brought up to a solid working state, the visibility is improved, and the scope is decreased, then I think this developer could definitely release a nice, interesting game. As it is now, I don't recommend you play this, but it is, of course, free to play this demo, so check it out if you're curious and want to try it for yourself. This game is really intriguing to me, so let me know if you would like to see a full playthrough of this demo in another video. I would definitely be willing to make it if you would want to see it. So those were 5 Steam games you probably never heard about. The games I picked for this one turned out to be really interesting, so I really enjoyed taking a look at them, thinking about them, and critiquing them. Now, this video is a little different compared to the other 2 I've made in this series, in the sense that this one did not include the gameplay segments where I give my first impressions and stuff. Those sections were nice because they showed a lot of the mechanics and the new player experience. So if I do continue making new installments in the series, I may bring those back. If you have seen the other videos, then definitely let me know which format you like better. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.